What's good, everybody? Hope you all are doing well and staying safe. So, did a world record attempt, but the stability of my FPS and stuff kind of just made me want to extract. I don't really 100% know if it was part of the game or if it was more due to me streaming, but anyways. I wanted to go ahead and share the build with you. I decided to use Follie just because it was a new frame and I wanted to take advantage of the new speed increase feature to its fullest extent and ability, more or less. Though I will say, even in the process of that, I really did get to enjoy this frame overall. It's nice to have a frame that's really, what I felt at least, was more heavily based around CC and situational using of relatively decent damaging abilities. I will say a lot of the playstyles are too spammy for me, so I really didn't get to test those fully, but go ahead and get into the build that I decided to kind of run for a baseline of learning the frame. This definitely wouldn't be a final version of it. To start with, though, I want to talk about the first ability and the problems and everything that I found with it. I had a lot of obstruction problems to where I would have to minorly move my camera angle in a certain direction in order to make it actually work, and I found that really annoying, and I hope to see better collision overall with it. Maybe something more in tune to like Nova's teleport, but I do get why maybe you wouldn't want to do that, though I have gone through the map already with this ability, so as for that not being a problem, it's still a problem. I do really like the fact that it can clear your status effects on yourself and also gives you roughly 3 seconds of immunity. Also, at the little area at which you do it in a small radius, it does spread the ink spread everywhere, which is really nice just for having extra health and energy orbs, which becomes a huge reliant, not so much a reliant, but a way to help you recover easier for your mistakes later on. For me personally, I found that the second ability, I mainly used the armament and arc trap, though the barrels did have some viability, but I found them to be a little bit more of, you had to have setting it up better in order to get the fullest extent out of them. The arc trap was a lot easier just to set down and let it go at the end of the day. The armament was just perhaps one of the best abilities I honestly want to say in her kit for me. I originally thought it counted as a melee ability, but from my further testing, I cannot confirm that as actually being a thing. The Lost Soul ability was nice, though the problems that I have with the speed up effect isn't have anything to do with so much Lost Soul, it's more frequency, so it kind of like fell back in placing, although it was extremely important. The O2 capsules were nice for situations where I strained myself a little too hard on O2 by trying to keep up and grab the speed increases whenever they occurred and such like that. So they were a nice little 3-minute cooldown that you can use to not have to get yourself further behind on oxygen capsules. What I would usually do is use a regular oxygen capsule and then use the 3-minute cooldown one. And that right there alone gives you roughly 60% O2 or so. So it's really a beautiful thing on a 3-minute cooldown, more or less. And then also being able to have the ability to have in just 90 seconds another regular capsule appear again. Surge I mainly used for the HP buff, but to be honest, it's completely worthless. The amount of damage that level cap mobs do, you're not going to really meet in a world where you're going to have enough health for that to matter. So that would be what I would say. I did it more just for the fun of it. I found problems with crashing in long runs using the energy regen buff, so I would ward away from using that whenever. And the rest of them, just use as you feel like using. They really don't matter. They're nice little temporary buffs, but nothing to really rely off of for anything. I have to give more testing into the defense node and the death orb, though in pinch situations they actually do have relatively good viability. The defense node is just duration based and draws aggro. So I have a little testing I want to do with that, kind of see what's going on with that situation. And the death orb, it's actually a really nice way to spread radiation and create a bit of distraction. Though I'm holding back further opinion on them just because I want to do better testing and figuring out exactly their true viability, if you will. But as to what it pertained into my run, they would just be further oh shit buttons, more or less. Though I would say, unless you're good at navigating the wheel rather quickly, it's probably better just to use your one. I can't really navigate the wheel that well under a stressful situation. And if you do have to navigate the wheel, I would recommend always using her one before you navigate it, just to give yourself a little bit of protection while you're taking the time to navigate. Her third ability, it worked really well for spreading ink spread everywhere. I like the minor slow. My biggest problems with it are when you lose the buff, you actually can't renew the buff whatsoever besides having to recast. And you don't really have a real indicator besides paying attention to your buffs on if you've lost it or not. I also noticed that every time, especially later on into the run, when I would recast, it would cause a relatively large FPS drop, usually in the range of about 20 to 30%, so it really wasn't great. My FPS would eventually recover, but there was a huge problem with that overall. I replaced her fourth ability, and mainly that was because for being a melee main, the fourth ability can make it rather awkward on keeping up your galvanized mod stacks as mobs are floating in the air. And although you can synergize with other abilities of hers to get those kills for you, mainly in her second ability from my research overall, for how I was playing, it just really didn't work well, so I opted in for that. Shock really isn't needed. The melee influence, like I said, is predominantly just a really nice general CC, but does have good effectiveness when you use with heavy attacks during the influence proc stages. But really, you can just fit whatever you want in there that'll make you comfortable for how you play. So, like I said, for me, it was just an ability I used in my stages of learning, more or less. The Archon shards that I used were 2 cast speed ones, which really help greatly, especially in the department of casting her one. It can feel rather blocky without some cast speed. And I also did use 2 melee crit damage purple ones, just to give myself better viability against scaling acolytes was the predominant reason for that. And 1 minor little equilibrium one. As for the build, like I said, it was a really large amount of just learning. So Undying Will, catalyzing shields, vigor, vigilante vigor, I should say, and fast deflection are just great survivability mods. Undying Will obviously isn't staying alive survivability, but it's getting yourself back up survivability, if you will. And I'll go into how that works here in a bit. When overextended, just to give her 3 more range, it's really nice to have, especially once you can get a Fissure buff if you are running a Fissure. And Blind Rage just to help with extra damage reduction from that, predominantly for my specters more than myself, and also to give myself extra electric damage. And then, of course, to proc the arcanes, we use Flow. And I'm login footed, of course, and Summoner's Wrath, just as a way to have my specters and my sentinel do a little bit of extra damage so that I don't have to be as active as I would be in the way of being able to keep up my O2. They can fill in some gaps so that I have the freedom to be able to go and grab speed increases, set myself up appropriately for praxis and stuff like that without having to put a large amount of attention to also managing my O2. So it kind of helps with those types of things. Angus as well is just another survivability thing, and Strike just helps. Strike just helps for the melee I'm using. So as for what I would call optional mods, most of this build is optional. If you're not running this, then you don't need Shock Trooper. If you're not worried about having to multitask so much, you don't need Summoner's Wrath. If your survivability is really good with her 1, you really don't need a Callousing Shield or an Angus or even any of these. And if you're not dying really, or the content isn't high enough for you to stress about that, you don't need that. As for what I would put in would be duration and power strength more than anything, but it would also depend on what you're helmeting here. So pretty much the entire build can be replaced, depending on what you're doing, more or less. Definitely not a set in stone build. It's just more of a build to help you get familiarized and comfortable with the frame and how it works. And then from there you can strip things away in order to gain yourself more convenience in other areas that you feel you're lacking in. The Enkaus, I was really hoping for a lot more for this weapon. I tried an AoE damage build, did not feel good at all. I settled for an AoE build that would be something to help spread status individually, especially cold with a Shivering Contagion, given the fact that it has such a high status chance. I like to silence most of my weapons in order to help reduce the amount of overall attention I draw and such like that. I did test a damage build, and it was good until about level 2 to 3,000, and then it fell off pretty hard. But this was mainly, it was the AoE, and also I tested with the beam a bit, but yeah, really just did not feel too great. Now there's probably something out there that works, and I just haven't identified it. The dual toxins were just used to kill enemies while I was down, and the reason for that would be energizing shot in order to help res me. And how this works is this mod here, and then using an equilibrium will give you give you health onto your warframe and will res you. It's not a guaranteed thing at the end of the day because you gotta get an energy orb and such, but it is a nice little thing that's been around in the game for many years now. So when I'm learning frames and everything, I like to use that just in case. You do want to have something that'll actually kill the enemies, so this is kind of what I chose for a build. Mainly just relying off of heat stacking. Encumber isn't really needed. I just used it as a way to get extra status on the mobs because of the condition overload type effect right over here, and then also, of course, for galvanized shot. It worked pretty well. It wasn't the most impressive thing in the world, but yeah, it definitely worked at killing mobs at level cap, and could kill X misses, which is the main thing you're going to be aiming for whenever you don't see energy orbs around. You're going to want to get stacks up really quick, and then go ahead and get your energy orb after killing a mob. And that's where Undying Will comes into effect as well, is because it'll allow you a fair bit more time in order to be able to have that occur and such. One thing I would recommend is to always just have it in a charged state, not actually activated, but fully charged. This way you don't accidentally waste any rounds or anything like that. As for the evolutions, I did base crit chance, reload from empty, and the condition overload type effect. Now, for the creme de la creme, if you will, because I am a melee main, and to use the dual Ichor, I went with the 34% increased base status chance, which becomes huge for the build, extra heavy attack wind-up speed, and because I don't run Naramon and I don't really have the arcanes and such to keep my combo up efficiently, I opted for this being the way to get my combo count up rather quickly without really having to stress about it. Now for the build, you don't need a Riven. It's only if you're doing like 25 plus hours and you're dealing with Acolytes at a really high level. And this is just purely made for Acolytes, nothing more. If you don't have this, you can just run Gladiator's Vice. Yes, you'll lose a little bit of each stat and the full melee damage, but I defer back to what I was saying. Shattering Impact, its predominant use is for Acolytes, but it does work well against other mobs, especially when you're using Vault's Shock or your helmet, because you're going to get passive armor stripping on a frame that may not already have it, while still also allowing for you to not have an interruption in your damage type status effects. Now, with the amount of status that you actually do have in this build, when you heavy attack, it'll generally hit around twice or so, two to three times. And this pretty much just creates a melee duplicate for you, but in a different facet and even higher extents. You have to sacrifice a lot of mod room in order to make this happen, and also have to take an evolution. But I do want to say it is well worth the amount of sacrifice that goes into it. It makes the weapon feel amazing. And now, as for the companion, you can really generally use whatever you want. I like Nautilus just for the ease of use of convenience of Cordon, but I guess wherever you're currently at in the game, that's what you can go ahead. I like using Sacrifice just because it's another res which falls into Undying Will. It also does give us some recovery time, which is really, really nice. The Manifold Bond helps greatly at proccing Guardian, so it just falls into another line of survivability when you're learning a frame and such like that. Restorative Bond and Synth Deconstruct are huge together in order to keep your Sentinel up as much as humanly possible. And with her ink ability, you're going to have a lot of health orbs everywhere. So you're going to be in a very good spot of being able to make sure that you can have enough health orbs around to keep your Sentinel alive at all times. Contagious Bond, whenever they do get a kill, it'll help overall with the killing in the room and such. Essentially deferring back earlier to what I was saying with the Summoner's Wrath. If you're not running Summoner's Wrath, I would not recommend this whatsoever. It would be better to set them up as a utility, which is a whole nother build, and it can be another point in time. I went for a very basic damage build, Heat, Magnetic, Viral, Hush in order to have them not draw as much aggro. Very, very important to do, otherwise they will draw a good amount of aggro. You don't really need a Bane mod. If you want it, you can use it. If you don't have a Bane mod, I mean, just whatever you really feel like it at the end of the day. I like using Verglass just because of the status chance and the beam effect that it has. It's very, very nice. I chose Dante as a Specter because he has a nice distracting ability with his page flight, and also that does give additional elemental weaknesses to your status effects, thus furthering your overall damage from melee. And also Triumph for additional, or not additional, but in order to have Overguard, which is just another line of survivability. And weapons, like I said, as long as they're silenced, that's all that really matters. So you can pick what you want to pick, just make sure it's silenced, otherwise they're going to draw a lot of aggro and they're going to die more frequently. And generally don't have your specters following you around because they're just going to die really fast doing it. They're best suited for stationary gameplay, unfortunately. I do wish that was different, but this is what it is, unfortunately. Now, as for the Amp and Operator Arcanes, I went with a 137. If you're good at headshots, you can get one-shots with the 1 with the primary fire. If you're not really good at shooting and such, I like using the 3 because it has a shotgun effect, with a bit of a spread. So it can make it a lot easier to hit something without having to actually aim at it. More aim in its general direction, I should say. And of course, these two are just made increased damage on operator ability and extra crit chance when energy depleted, which is why Matter Eye really helps overall, because Void Strike is a beautiful way to trigger both of them at one time. If you don't have Void Strike up, unfortunately, you will have to spam Contamination Wave, which will take you more. Essentially, what you will have to do to wait for the crit chance arcane to proc is you use it as many times as you can, and then you have to wait for a regen to actually occur, and then use it one more time, and then you get a full drain. Otherwise, if you can position yourself correctly, you could void sling it maybe to get rid of it, but yeah, rather inconvenient is what I'm getting at. Now, Savior just helps if you're, especially at level cap, your operator can die relatively quickly, so having that extra 5 seconds gives you 5 more seconds to kill Thrax and deal with them, and because it has a 90-second cooldown and Thrax show up every reward rotation, you're always guaranteed to have Savior up to give you that little bit extra time to deal with them. Lockdown I primarily use for violence because he does cancel out abilities, and specifically with Follie, directing back to the 3 ability, he will cancel it out and require you to have to recast it, which is honestly just really annoying to have to deal with every single time.